You ever had that feeling that you forgot about something that you were supposed to do? You walk into a room with a goal and then a split second later, you forget what you were doing, and it's not until hours later when you remember what you were meant to do. That's how I feel about these major videos, because it's been too goddamn long. That's right, it's finally major time. For real this time. To be held in Salt Lake City, this will be the first major of the 2026 season, and with the changes made to SI qualifications, the first chance for teams to earn crucial SI points in a bid to qualify for the 2027 Six Invitational, seeing as they no longer reward direct invites for major champions. I'm not better about that at all. Do I sound better? The big change from last year is with the inclusion of the CNL for the 2026 season and beyond, we are back to a 20-team major, and that means 3 phases. Yeah, you guessed it. After a 12-month absence, the play-ins are back, which means more work for me. Each region will feature at least one team in the play-in phase of the majors, and the placement of each seed looks like this. It kind of works the same as it did back in the 2023-2024 seasons when there were open qualifiers to the majors, but with some obvious changes. The CNL having the most teams start at this point makes a lot of logical sense, especially as Salt Lake will be the region's debut international event. The bottom seed for the Big 3 and the APL wildcard starting here in the play-ins is also valid, as is Oceania starting here because they didn't do particularly great at SI. Now, I'm led to understand that the seeding for the APL is contingent on results from the preceding event, similar to the wildcard slot. We'll see if that seeding changes for Japan. Those 8 teams will compete in a modified double elimination bracket to earn the right to join the remaining 12 teams and play in the Swiss phase of the major. And the equation is rather simple. You win twice, you get to move on. You lose twice, however, you get to go home. And now, to go over the teams competing at Salt Lake. We kick off with the EML, and following possibly the biggest shakeup in rostermania history, the pieces have largely fallen into place, resulting in a new hierarchy that proves to be just as unpredictable as the offseason. At the top of the pecking order is G2, who might be one of the biggest beneficiaries of the offseason. Saying goodbye to longtime soldiers Blaz and Laura, one of which we'll see in Utah by the way, they managed to sway former World Championship teammate Benjamin Master back into the fold after his time in North America came to an end. But the biggest talking point has got to be their new star fragger in Shaiko. After his many years of service on that BDS Falcons roster, the French superstar has finally left the team that has brought him so much success and heartbreak. But will a fresh start with a new team be what finally breaks his jinx? Well, going by the results of the EML's kickoff stage, it's a damn good start. Suffering only the one loss during the group stage, G2 would get top seed in Group A and get that much coveted first round bye in the playoff. Despite Twisted Minds giving them a bit of a scare on border, G2 was able to quell the uprising and qualify to Salt Lake 2-0. And for an added cherry on top, they swept away Virtus Pro to claim the top seed for the EML in a dominant 2-0. Despite their impressive results during kickoff, I'm still not completely convinced, because we've seen this before with G2. Don't get me wrong, G2 snagging Shaiko away from Falcons is a huge coup, and he is putting in the work. The Frenchman hasn't had a bad game yet. Where my concerns lie, however, is the personalities on that team and how everything is meant to gel together when you've presumably spent millions on 2 high-profile signings within the last 12 months. Stompin' last year, and now Shaiko. This specific roster has the potential to be the greatest in this organization's history, which is saying something given the current goats of G2, but part of me is worried that this is all going to collapse before it really has a chance to get going. Salt Lake is going to be the real acid test for these guys, but not within this server. Returning to the international scene for the first time since 2025, Virtus Pro turned a new leaf after the long-standing Team Empire core was finally broken up after a full year of mediocrity. Old school fans are crying in their monsters right now. Joystick, Shepard, and Coach Xhaka was released from the team after they failed to qualify for the 2026 Six Invitational. Always was originally slated to remain with the starting roster, but he had to step away for a time for personal reasons. He is still on the books and is working with the rest of VP in the interim, but he didn't play during kickoffs. But then the question becomes, how do you replace such a legendary core and coach that was stubbornly Russian for the longest time? Well, by throwing that train of thought out the window and going international. Joining Pasha and Dan for 2026 is Rorik, Skies, and new IGL Nyko, as well as former FearX coach Dark. And the results were almost immediate. Like with G2, VP only lost the one match during their group stage. They were even the ones to hand G2 their only loss in groups. But what let them down was an overtime loss against Shifters on the final playday, compromising their chances at the first seed in Group A. Nevertheless, they would breeze into major qualifications with 2 quick and clean wins over new organization Rebels and Team Falcons? That wasn't in the script, but VP will take it all the same. However, they were on the receiving end of a 2-0 kicking at the hands of Shaiko and G2. Still, second place in kickoffs is not a bad thing. Like with G2, this new look Virtus Pro has elevated this roster to a whole new level. But unlike G2, who were largely consistent with their individual performances, VP had wildly fluctuating results. Pasha, for example, had a grand final map where he went 0-10 and an EPS rating in the mid-20s, despite having a blinder of a map the previous series where his EPS was in the 120s. Granted, he wasn't the only one with inconsistent maps, but he was the most egregious. Also, this could just be a symptom of being such a new team where everything might not be clicking together properly just yet, and that problem should be alleviated before the start of the major. Nevertheless, Salt Lake is going to be a good test for this new look VP. Making their international LAN debut, Twisted Minds might be a new organization, but some of the players will be familiar to longtime fans of this new era of the Blast R6 circuit. Comprised of a combination of ex-Team Falcons and GK esports players, Dove, Hasham, JLad, P9, and Trixt are back in T1 following Twisted Minds buying Magicko Esports EML comp slot for the 2026 season. And let me just say, it is good to see a full team of players from the Middle East back in the top flight of Siege. It is something we have missed. The group stage wasn't the smoothest it could be, with only the 2 wins out of a possible 4. Though when you have Team Falcons in your group, you're kind of expected to maybe lose 1. Nevertheless, Twisted Minds would begin playoffs in the upper bracket with a 2-0 win over Fnatic before being sent down to the lower bracket by G2. Despite losing 7-0 on map 1 of their match against Shifters, Twisted Minds would somehow come back and win the other 2 maps to qualify for Salt Lake. And even better, they would take that momentum and beat Team Falcons 2-0, earning their place in the Swiss phase in the major. Twisted Minds feel like the wildcard of the EML, well deserving in their place at the major, but perhaps punching a little bit above their weight. Taking down Team Falcons to get a start in the Swiss phase is very good and will be invaluable for their prep time. But when you put them side by side against the rest of the team starting in Swiss alongside them, it feels like there's a bit of a skill gap. Especially when you take into account these guys have been away from Tier 1 for over 12 months. They'll get a good run of the major, make no mistake about that. But I think playoffs might be a step too far at this point in time for Twisted Minds. And finally, Team Falcons. No, this is not a belated April Fool's joke. Team Falcons qualified to the major in 4th place. Finally deciding to release Shaiko after the 2026 Six Invitational, Falcons gave the unenviable task of filling the French Superstars role to the most valuable player during Team Secret's SI run. Joom had some pretty big shoes to fill going into the new season, and he did pretty well to begin with, helping Falcons get the first seed out of Group B and gaining the bye in the playoffs. The only match they lost was against Joom's former teammates in Secret. But playoffs is where the wheels almost come off the rails. So close to qualifying to the major in the top 2, only for the newly rebuilt Virtus Pro to beat them in a surprisingly clean 2-0. Falcons would still end up qualifying to Salt Lake City after getting payback against Team Secret in the lower bracket, only to fall short in the very next match against Twisted Minds. Falcons are in a really weird situation for 2 key reasons. Number 1, they have to start their major campaign in Phase 1, which has never happened to this team since this new format was put in place back in 2024. So the endurance is going to be put to the test in a way they've never experienced before. But the real worry I have for Falcons is we don't know where their ceiling is. Is Joom a 1-for-1 replacement for Shaiko, or has there been some role shuffling to accommodate? The results from kickoff hasn't really inspired a lot of confidence in me either. When you utterly decimate the SI runners-up in one match, only to fall short of the mark the very next match on the same day, something isn't quite falling into place yet. I'm willing to give this new version of Team Falcon some time, but it's insane to think these guys are at risk of not even making to the Swiss phase of the major. But if you want true insanity, then the NAL has you covered. It's less who qualified to Salt Lake and more who didn't qualify. No M80, no 100 Thieves, and no SSG. I think the phrase topsy-turvy is quite applicable here, especially with who the first seed of the NAL is. And that is Five Fears, one of the newest organizations to join the R6 circuit. But while the org is new, Fans of the NAL will know this is the former Envy core that struggled during the 2025 season. Talk about a massive glow-up. After Envy released this roster at the end of the SI LCQs and half the roster went their separate ways, JJ Blast and Rival got reinforcements in the form of Snake, Fens, and Forest, as well as Fanex as a second coach to help Archeromics. We all know how good Forest is on his best day, but I think people may have slept on Snake a little bit when he was on TSM back in 2022. Not to mention, he was also on Envy with JJ last season. And you want to know something scary? 5 Fears went completely flawless in both groups and playoffs. And keep in mind, they were in the same group as 100 Thieves, M80, and Shopify Rebellion. And they swept them away like they were nothing. Starting in the second round of the upper bracket, both their playoff matches against 1 of 30 and Wildcard were very close affairs. But the younger, energetic upstarts proved their potential by taking the top seed of the NAL for Salt Lake. I genuinely don't think we have had a team in the NAL explode onto the scene the same way 5 Fears did for 26. To take down one of the most anticipated rosters on their Siege Esports debut, the reigning major champions, and one of the most consistent rosters from 2025 within the group stage. That is just wild! And the cherry on top, to be the best ranked NA team from the Six Invitational in a clean 2-0? What? That being said, however, given this is the first major for 3/5 of that roster, part of me is concerned they will crack under the pressure of it being their debut major. Forest's presence on the team and the major being held on home soil should alleviate some of those nerves, so I'm not too concerned for these lads. Everyone going to Salt Lake should be very wary of 5 Fears. I just hope they can back it up against international competition. Speaking of Wildcard, they returned to the international stage after their stellar Six Invitational campaign earlier in the year. With Dash returning to his native Brazil for the new season, the NA organization snagged Adrian from Team Secret on the back of their Cinderella run in Paris. But is that enough for Wildcard to retain their rank within the NAL? Well, it's shaky. Third in their group with losses to the new Dark Zero and SSG rosters meant that their Wildcard would start in the first round of the upper bracket. Not ideal, but it could be worse. You could be 100 things. Despite losing their first map against M80 in a 7-1 shellacking, Wildcard would return serve and win the other 2 maps in very close affairs. And it was the same story in their rematch against DZ, but it was way closer and with a lot more on the line. Losing to 5 Fears is not a great way to wrap up their kickoff campaign, but given how FF blew everyone's expectations out of the water, I wouldn't say that's a bad thing for Wildcard. I feel like they're building to something. What it looks like is anyone's guess. Anyone who underestimates them or doesn't give them enough respect is going to pay the price. But that cuts both ways, and Wildcard should be very aware of this. However, if they can build on the momentum from previous events, then they look a very scary prospect. Wildcard are no longer the underdogs of NA, and they should be treated as such during the major. Meanwhile, Dark Zero's prospects are looking up. After a year where they missed every international event that matters, and Pambazu retired briefly, DZ gutted the remainder of the roster, leaving only NJR as the survivor. Luckily, help was at hand in the form of SSG's old coaching staff, 3 of their ex-players, and Kino after being released into free agency from M80. And all their collective losses, a Dark Zero's gain. First place in their group during kickoff with a flawless win record, including a 7-1 against Wildcard, DZ looked set to win the entire stage. But Wildcard simply said, "Hold my beer."
Top floor control still being held by Wildcard now as they have the yellow pings. Spiker knows exactly where this is, but he can't get a good read on it. He'll reposition over towards the hatch. This could be a death drop. Oh my God, Spiker!
Now in the lower bracket, Dark Zero fought for survival against the rebuilt SSG, and even though it got really close, the men in purple beat the astronauts 2-1 and made it to Salt Lake City. And the proverbial icing on the cake was making it into Phase 2 of the major with a 2-1 win in their final series of kickoff. The majority of that SSG roster and staff, combined with NJR and Kino, have turned what I would consider a floundering Dark Zero into a potential powerhouse. But I still have a couple of questions leading into the major. Is this rapid success rate sustainable? The Callout has done a great job molding Faults, J9O, and Newers into a very stable core with a great work philosophy back on SSG. But NJR and Kino are vastly different players to Benja and Ashen. and whether or not they've properly bought into call-out system remains to be seen. Initial results look positive, and Dark Zero should make a deep run into Swiss phase. But don't be all that surprised if they miss out on playoffs by the smallest of margins. And finally, we have the bottom seed of the NAL, one of the few teams to not make any changes during the offseason. Shopify Rebellion. And I'm going to be straight with you. I'm worried. The only team that qualified to Salt Lake City to start in the lower bracket of the playoffs, thanks to them coming fourth in their group. Overtime wins over 100 Thieves and 1 of 30 is all well and good, but when you have absolutely shocking losses against M80 and 5 Fears within the span of 2 days, that doesn't bode well for your major chances. And even though they were able to get over the line in the lower bracket against M80 and 1 of 30, Rebellion had to walk the tightrope to get there with no safety net. And they got close to falling over a couple of times. DZ denying them a spot in Phase 2 of Salt Lake kinda sums up their kickoff stage in a nutshell for me. Just good enough to make the cut, but had to rely on a little luck to get there. Rebellion really needs to get their act together come play-ins, because they are coming in hot. And if they're not ready for it, they'll be knocked out of the major before it even properly begins. And they can't rest on their laurels either, because there is some serious competition in Phase 1. They should be good enough to make it into the Swiss phase from play-ins. But then again, they should be good enough to start the major in Swiss in the first place. Moving below the equator to the SAL, and they have also had the mother of all rostermania shakeups. And while the kickoffs might have been surprising in the EML and NAL, they were particularly brutal in South America. With no Fluxo W7M and no Team Liquid Alienware, oh yeah, I'm getting used to saying that now, who can we say has a real shot at winning the major? Well, the new look Furia might have something to say about that. Despite moving most of the roster on and starting again from scratch, the new look Furia does not show any signs of slowing down. With Volps, Laura, Boxer, and Diaz joining Herds, they would take the top seed in their group despite a surprise overtime loss to INTZ, which ironically would be their only win throughout all of kickoff. The Panthers would take the easy path to Salt Lake after beating Fluxo W7M 2-0 in their qualification match, and they would claim the top seed for the SAL, both in clean 2-0 victories. It's kind of scary that Furia somehow found the right puzzle pieces they needed and went back to doing what they do best. It may be early days, but the signs are positively scary for this new look Furia. Volps proves to be the X Factor he's best known for, Laura has put his time on G2 to good use, even Bogzera is putting up the digits when needed. That said, I'm worried this could be a false dawn. I'll explain why later on. Ninjas in Pajamas returned to the major after coming second in kickoff. However, I can't help but think they may have coasted into qualifying for Salt Lake City. Bringing in Basato for the outgoing cons after their less than successful Six Invitational tilt, NIP actually started strong during the group stage, dropping only the one match against Furia on their way to second place. A strong showing against Los in the first round of the playoffs proved to be a boon for the Ninjas, as they were going to beat Team Liquid Alienware in their qualification match, despite dropping the first map against the former Furia core. They may have fallen short against the new look Furia roster, but they've managed to do what many pundits thought improbable given how competitive South America is in general. Of all the teams that qualified to Phase 2 for Salt Lake, NIP might be the one I'm least sure on. Or, more accurately, I don't know where they're going to place. They had some good results in kickoff, and beating the former Fury core to qualify for the major is no small feat. But that's a bit of a monkey's paw, because that final map could have gone either way, and we could be talking about Team Liquid instead had they won out in overtime. It could be the format for kickoffs flattering them, but I wouldn't be all that surprised if NIP struggled during the major and ended up near the bottom of the Swiss phase. But given my recent prediction history, the returning dual Six Invitational champions Faze Clan also made it to Salt Lake City. But they almost didn't. There's a term in traditional competitive sport called Premiership Hangover, where the team that won the previous season has a noticeable drop in form the following year. Faze look like they're in the early stages of said hangover, but they haven't succumbed to it yet. Second place in a somewhat stacked Group A, losing only to their long-term rivals in Liquid, but otherwise, Faze were dominant throughout groups. Going into playoffs, it looked business as usual. But then they would lose their first match against Fluxo W7M 1-2. Luckily for Faze fans, they would rebound hard against Black Dragons 2-0, only dropping 2 rounds out of 16. But to qualify for Salt Lake, they had to get past the new look Furia and an El Clasico for all the marbles. And although Liquid took map 1, Faze performed the reverse sweep and took the series 2-1, qualifying for the major in the process. I would be worried for Faze going into Salt Lake City if we haven't seen how bonkers good they can be on LAN. Need I remind you, back-to-back SI World Champions. You don't get that solely on luck. Despite them nearly missing out on the major altogether, I still consider Faze heavy favourites to win their third trophy in 2 years. Or at the very least, they'll make it deep into playoffs. Finally, the bottom seed for the SAL and beginning in Phase 1, Los. And as I am sure about how deep Faze Clan are going to go, I am equally sure about how Los is going to do in Salt Lake City. And it's not promising. Lumped in the same group as Faze Clan and Team Liquid Alienware, Los' prospects for groups were not great, and that proved to be the case when they would only get wins over Imperial and Black Dragons. Although they did push Liquid to all 12 rounds, so I guess you would consider that a win. Not that that would amount to much, as they would immediately get sent to the lower bracket at the hands of NIP. A confidence-winning boost over INTZ later, and Los also pulled off the improbable, denying Fluxo W7M a spot at the major in a 2-1 reverse sweep. Faze Clan would inevitably put Los' run to bed, but they had done what they had set out to do. Despite coming from the most competitive region in the ecosystem, I would not rate Los' chances of making it out of Phase 1 highly, purely down to the competition that's already in play-ins. When you come up against Falcons or Rebellion, teams who theoretically should be in Phase 2 already, it kinda makes the job that much harder. If they do somehow qualify for Swiss, it would be the tiniest of margins. On to the APL now, and this is where things get a little screwy. As a reminder for those who didn't watch my previous video, the APL has the wildcard slot for the subregion that does the best at previous events. Exhibit A, Asia has the wildcard slot for Salt Lake City because Weibo Gaming was the best placed APL team at SI in February. So alongside the winners of each subregion's respective kickoff events, the runner-up for Asia also gets a fly to Utah. Which is a phrase I never thought I would say on camera. Kag Osaka qualified for Salt Lake City from APAC North following an abysmal end to the 2025 season that saw them missing out on competing at Invite for the second time in 3 years. And at this point, I'm not sure what I can say that hasn't been said to death. Kag had a near flawless run in the upper bracket for kickoffs, beating the ex-PSG Talon roster in a close 2-0 in their first game and an utter demolition of D plus Kia in the semi-finals 2 weeks later. Don't ask me why the schedule for the APL was weird. Kinotro put up a bit of a fight in the upper bracket final, but they still went down 2-0 once Kag woke up on LAN. In the grand final against D plus Kia, they would suffer their first map loss throughout all of kickoff. However, they would still claim the series and the stage 2-1. The problem is, well, we've seen this before. They either win the domestic stage outright or get close to the top, and as soon as they reach the major or SI, they just capitulate in the saddest way possible. That SI 2025 result seems more and more like a fever dream with each passing week. Even with the addition of a new coach and them starting in Phase 2 of the major, I still don't think it's going to be enough for Kag to make a dent. We need a miracle here. To precisely no one's surprise, Weibo Gaming are back on the international stage and are looking to build on the momentum gained from their top 8 finish in Paris. Another team to remain unchanged going into the new season, they looked primed to continue their good work. And for once, the odds look genuinely favourable for the super team. Weibo had a completely flawless playoff bracket, not dropping a single map throughout their entire upper bracket run. Soulside Esports and Team Orchid certainly gave them a run for their money during the semi-final and upper bracket finals respectively, but their other 2 games were cakewalks. I don't really know what else to add here. Weibo looked exciting and switched on during kickoff. Once they put their foot on the accelerator, they did not let off even once. Starting in the second phase is certainly going to help Weibo considerably. Those extra few days of prep time should be invaluable. And if they make the most of it, I can see them punching through their own glass ceiling and finally making it into the playoff bracket. They have the momentum on their side, but it's really on the boys to make the most of it. The sole Oceanic representative for the major is Enterprise Esports, but not in the guise you might be familiar with Fisher Guy retiring from comp after SI, as well as Player, Relays, and Mingoren being let go from the team during the offseason. There was speculation on what the new roster might look like, especially with some lucrative free agents on the market. Well, those rumors turned out to be largely accurate, with former Chiefs players Jigsaw and Brendo and former Ludovica Cola Cairo joining forces with Bappin and Tuan to create arguably the first true Oceanic super team. But the biggest surprise is former Fnatic pro player Mag being dragged out of retirement as the new coach. I certainly didn't see that one coming. And nor did I see them blowing the rest of the competition right out of the water from the word go. An utter domination against Barbie Boys where they only lost 2 rounds, both of which were on map 2 of Bank. A slight stumble against Team Anios before beating them 7-0 on the final map of Chalet. Mad LFO not being able to keep up with EP in their upper bracket final match. Not even ex-teammates Relays and Player could do anything to stop them in the grand final, as Enterprise would claim the OCE kickoff grand final 2-1 against the Chiefs. Being able to replicate the former Enterprise roster's domestic results is one thing. It's another thing entirely to carry that same form internationally. Right here is where this new EP roster's test truly begins. Can they stake their claim as a serious roster on the international stage? As of now, it does look promising, but I do have some concerns. We saw them have a very slow start on Bank during the grand final where they should have been able to deny the plan or have the easy retake ahead of them. And they were caught with their pants around their ankles multiple times. That is not going to fly at the major. They need to be switched on from jump or they will get punished if they make the same mistakes. I am quietly confident that Mad can pull these guys in line, and I'm equally as confident Enterprise could make a deep run if they make it out of play-ins, but they need to get to Swiss first. And the final team from the APL is none other than Daystar, the runners-up of the Asia kickoff stage. Like with Weibo, Daystar are looking to build on their Six Invitational results. However, unlike Weibo, who seek to prove their potential, Daystar are laying solid foundations for future tournaments. Making only the one change during the offseason, with Joe Gore leaving to join Elevate and Bin Bin coming to take his place, Daystar didn't have the greatest of starts during their kickoff campaign, losing to Soul's Heart 2-1. Even though the series was close, the men in pink were immediately put on the back foot. But that didn't seem to deter them, because what they did next, well, that was nothing short of impressive. Fury, Elevate, Soul's Heart, Team Orchid, they all would fall to the wayside in that order, in increasingly difficult and arduous matches all the way to the grand final. The resilience those boys showed in that lower bracket gauntlet, you have my respect, gentlemen. Take nothing away from them losing the grand final against Weibo with only 1 round win to their name. They had just gotten done playing a marathon of a lower bracket final less than an hour prior, and Weibo were just on another level altogether. The fact that Daystar qualified for Salt Lake City in the manner they did showed that SI qualification earlier in the year was no fluke. They mean business. And now they have the opportunity to build on their SI result and maybe, just maybe, return to their old direwolves form from a few years ago. And finally, we have the new CNL. And we have a small problem. I wasn't able to watch as much of the CNL as I would have liked, and there isn't a hell of a lot of info on the teams that have played outside of official matches. So my ball knowledge of the CNL is limited compared to how much I know of the rest of the leagues, which admittedly isn't that much anyway. So for the sake of fairness and brevity, I'm just going to skate through these 4 teams, provide a brief promo on who they are, and give my take on what to expect from them at the major. Beginning with the inaugural CNL champions, All Gamers, these guys should be a familiar name to those who watched the APL SI Last Chance qualifiers back in January. MC, Solomid, Moonlight, Railgun, and Yaz all got within 1 series of qualifying for the 2026 Six Invitational over Daystar, which would have been massive for not only AG, but the region as a whole. And that was before China was announced as the new competitive region. Speaking of the CNL, AG went almost flawless throughout the entire kickoff event, dropping only 1 map against Wolves in the first round of the upper bracket. There wasn't really anything stopping AG during the CNL, and they were rightly the odds-on favorites to win the kickoff stage outright. They were switched on and ruthless throughout, if not a little rough around the edges in terms of strategy. Now, this could be a case of new region, new meta syndrome, but to me, some of their executions looked a little shaky. But in this case, it's not a bad thing, because they are part of such a new competitive region, and they may not be used to competing at the highest level just yet. And because they're starting in Phase 2 of the Major, they get a chance to face off against some of the best teams in the world to build up that much-needed experience so they can take it back to the CNL. As the saying goes, a rising tide raises all ships. The first of our CNL teams competing in the play-ins is Edward Gaming, or EDG if you prefer. These guys have been around the esports scene for over a decade, with teams in League of Legends, Valorant, Counter-Strike, Clash Royale. For their first foray into Siege, EDG signed to the team Bottom Love, yes, that is his name, don't judge, Carpe, On July, Direction, NATO as their coach, and Mentalist. The former Bleed IGL finds himself on a new home in a new region after a year away from the server. And I don't think it's done him any good. Yes, EDG was almost undefeated during kickoff. The only team they lost to was AG twice. But Mentalist was by far and away the worst rated player on the team. And it wasn't even close. On the opposite side of the spectrum, Direction was actually the highest rated player during kickoff by some distance. A 1.68 rating, nearly twice as many kills as deaths, and a cost of 83%. That is absurd. Despite that, however, I do not see EDG placing all that well during the major. And it's not because I think their players are bad by any means, but I am questioning whether their skill within China can match up to the rest of the world when you take into account who else is in Phase 1. That said, EDG may actually get a cheeky win because of the format during the play-ins, and I say this knowing full well who they matched up against for that very first game. In any case, while I don't think they will be terrible by any stretch of the imagination, the level of experience EDG are about to come up against is going to be quite difficult for them to surmount. And we have a similar situation for Wolves Esports, who have decided to depart from the EML and make their way over to the CNL for 2026 and beyond. And they've already run into some serious difficulties, but not for the reasons you think. Ex-Tyloo players Arfang, CPK, Deimos, Cardi, and Recap signed to Wolves just in time for kickoffs to begin. However, the Wolves' first legitimate attempt at a Chinese expansion didn't go according to plan after a dreadful group stage, winning only the one match out of a possible 4 against Leviathan Soul. If you've kept up with the CNL in any way, that should tell you everything. Though they were the only team to take a map from all gamers throughout the entirety of kickoff, so credit there, I guess. They would rebound and make it all the way through the lower bracket up until their final match against EDG in the lower bracket final, eliminating OneCoin and Kingzone from major contention, and even sneaking into third after a close match in the lower bracket semi-final. Now, if that were the full story, I would wrap it up there. However, things just got considerably more difficult for Wolves over the last week. Shortly after the CNL wrapped, Cardi and Recap were effectively banned from the CNL and suddenly released from the Wolves roster, all but confirming they would not compete in Salt Lake City. To my knowledge, the specifics haven't been revealed to the public, and while nothing has been confirmed, there is enough speculation to give something of a definitive answer, which I am not going into details over because this is neither the place nor the time. And to make matters worse, at the time of writing, Deimos had his visa application rejected. Whether or not he manages to get it sorted in time, the Wolves are going to be in for a hell of a time in the major. Thankfully, Wolves were able to promote sub Cap 17 to the starting 5 and sign fresh-faced rookie Fate to the roster in time for roster lock. Now let's see if Deimos can get his visa issues sorted out in time. And last but not least, 4 angry men.
Hammond! You moron!
No, not what I meant. The esports org. 4AM also competed in the APAC LCQ for SI last year, but they didn't do nearly as well as All Gamers, being among the first eliminated from the bracket. For the CNL, Darkly, Car, Leader, Tongli, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong by the way, former coach Gotti, and new coach Eden came in second in their group, only losing to EDG in overtime. Starting the playoffs with a win over OneCoin, 4AM came up against AG in the very next round, and was sent down to the lower bracket in a closed 2-0 loss. They did miss out on third place after losing to Wolves in the lower bracket semi-final by the narrowest of margins, but it didn't really matter. 4AM were going to their first major. If it weren't for the Wolves' aforementioned roster woes, I would consider 4AM the least likely to make it out of Phase 1 of the major, purely because who they're up against in their very first match. And regardless of results, it's not going to get any easier. I do want the CNL teams to have a good showing in Salt Lake City, 4AM included, but they're in for a rough time. In any case, they should use this time as a learning experience and take what they gain from other teams back to the CNL for the rest of the regular season. All in all, I think kickoff stage this season was a hit compared to last year's Mickey Mouse Reload tournament that was more of a showcase than an actual event. A short and sharp stage where you need to be on it the entire time or else you will fall behind the curve. And we saw exactly that in nearly all the regional leagues. With some of the newer teams showing that they can hang with the rest of the big boys, it gives us something new to bite into instead of the same thing over and over and over again. I, for one, am excited to see what teams like Five Fears, Twisted Minds, the New Look Enterprise, come on, and all gamers bring to the table. Do I think they're going to win the major? Hell no. But at least it'll be interesting. I hope. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go and ruin my body clock. Again. Well, that is it for this preview video. Who do you think will have a good result at Salt Lake City? Drop a comment below and tell me your prediction for Major Champion. As always, if you like this video and you want to see more of it, leave a like and subscribe to this channel. We all know the YouTube algorithm can be rather ruthless. Before I sign off, a couple of things. Firstly, I finally managed to upgrade my rig to something with some more considerable kick behind it, so recording and editing my videos should be a lot smoother going forward, which should translate into me getting my videos out faster than before, assuming I can get off my ass and write these scripts in time. I do want to return to streaming as well, but I need a workaround regarding my internet so it's not a jumbled mess that buffers every 5 seconds. I'll keep you in the loop regarding that. Secondly, and more importantly, you may have noticed that I changed my name and bio ever so slightly. That is because I've managed to secure a new home as a content creator with Horizon Esports for the foreseeable future. Horizon is a newly formed Australian org that aims to build teams that compete within ANZ and Southern APAC in a variety of different esports. They currently have a Valorant team competing in T2 and T3 and are looking to build a Siege squad as well, but nothing has been set in stone as of yet. Regardless, there are still opportunities for me to expand on the content I make as the org slowly gets bigger and expands into other esports. As for the content I make here on YouTube, nothing is changing on that front. In fact, I'm actually looking to expand into the rest of the APL for this season. It's going to be a bigger undertaking than normal, but I am up for the challenge. Speaking of my next video, that is going to be Phase 1 predictions for the Major, which I'm aiming to have dropped the day the Major begins. Until next time, operators, this is your resident Silver Wolf, signing off.